The first drop of dust fell into Adelaide Parker's water bucket on the hottest day of July, 1882. And she knew before the sun climbed any higher that her life had just changed in ways she could not yet fathom. She lowered the rope again, heard it hit bottom with a hollow thunk instead of the reassuring splash that had greeted her every morning for the past 3 years, and felt her stomach drop like a stone down that same dry shaft. At 24 years old, she had survived her husband's death from pneumonia the previous winter, had kept their small ranch outside Marfa, Texas, running through sheer determination and the help of 2 aging ranch hands. But water was life itself in this unforgiving country, and without it, everything she had fought to preserve would turn to dust and blow away on the relentless West Texas wind. She stood there in the purple light of dawn, her dark hair already escaping its braid, her calico dress sticking to her back, and stared down into that black hole as if willpower alone could make the water return. The windmill creaked uselessly above her, its blades turning in the hot breeze but drawing up nothing. Her 40 head of cattle would need water by evening. The chickens, the 2 horses, the vegetable garden she had coaxed into existence behind the house, all of it depended on that well. The nearest water was the creek 4 miles east, but it ran low this time of year, barely enough for the wildlife that depended on it. The town well in Marfa was 8 miles away, and she had no way to haul enough water daily to keep everything alive. Adelaide walked back to the house slowly, her mind racing through options that all seemed to dead end in disaster. She could sell the cattle at a loss, but then what would she have? The land itself was worth little without water. She could abandon the ranch and move into town, take in sewing or washing, but the thought of giving up the home she and Thomas had built together made her chest tighten with grief and stubborn pride. She had already lost so much. She could not bear to lose this too. Her ranch hand, old Pete Martinez, found her sitting on the porch steps an hour later, her face set in that expression he had come to recognize over the months since Thomas died. It was the look of someone who had decided to fight even when the odds were stacked against them. "The well?" he asked, though he already knew. "Dry as bone," Adelaide said. "I need you to take the wagon into town today. Buy every barrel we can afford and fill them at the town well. We will make do until I figure something else out." Pete nodded slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Adelaide, that is a lot of hauling. We would need to go every few days just to keep the stock watered, and that is if we cut back everywhere else." "I know," she said quietly, "but what choice do we have?" The first week passed in a blur of rationing and worry. Pete and the other hand, a quiet man named Jim Cooper, took turns making the 16-mile round trip to town, coming back with barrels of water that seemed to disappear almost as soon as they arrived. Adelaide stopped watering the garden except for a cupful here and there on the vegetables that were closest to harvest. She cut the herd's water to barely enough to keep them standing. She stopped washing anything that did not absolutely need washing. The dust accumulated on everything, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. It was on the 8th morning, just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, that Adelaide heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes, expecting to see Pete returning from an early trip to town. Instead, she saw an unfamiliar wagon pulled by 2 sturdy draft horses, and driving it was a man she had seen around town but had never spoken to. Russell Wade was the kind of man people noticed without quite knowing why. He was not particularly tall, perhaps 5'10", but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made him seem larger. His face was tanned dark from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s, and he wore the simple clothing of a working cowboy, his hat pulled low against the glare. He worked for the Double R Ranch north of town, one of the larger spreads in the area, and Adelaide had heard he was considered one of the best horsemen in the county. What she had not heard, because Russell Wade was not a man who talked much about anything, was that he had noticed her months ago in town, had seen the grief in her eyes and the steel in her spine, and had found himself thinking about her more than was probably wise for a man who had nothing much to offer but a good day's work and a bedroll. He pulled the wagon to a stop near her porch and climbed down, not quite meeting her eyes. In the wagon bed were 4 large barrels, all of them full and sloshing with water. Adelaide stared at them, then at him. "I think you have the wrong ranch, mister." Russell shook his head slightly. He took off his hat, turning it in his hands in that way men did when they were uncomfortable. "No, madam, this is the Parker place, is it not?" "It is, but I did not order any water." "I know," Russell said. His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had grown up in Texas. "Heard in town your well went dry. Figured you could use some help." Adelaide felt her cheeks flush. Pride warred with desperate need, and for a moment she did not know what to say. "That is very kind, Mr. Wade, but I cannot pay you for it." "Did not ask you to," Russell said simply. He had already started moving toward the barrels, preparing to unload them. "Wait," Adelaide said, coming down the steps. "I do not understand. Why would you do this?" Russell paused, finally looking directly at her. His eyes were a surprising shade of gray-blue, and there was something in them that made her breath catch slightly. "Because you need it," he said, "and because I can." Before she could protest further, he had started hauling the barrels down, his muscles working under his shirt as he maneuvered each one to the ground near the water trough. Pete had come out of the bunkhouse by then and stood watching with unconcealed surprise. "Where do you want them?" Russell asked. Adelaide felt off balance, uncertain how to handle this unexpected kindness. "I suppose near the trough is fine. But Mr. Wade, I really cannot accept this if you expect payment. I am barely keeping things together as it is." "Then it is a good thing I do not expect payment," Russell said. He finished with the barrels and climbed back onto the wagon. "I will be back tomorrow morning." "What do you mean, back tomorrow morning?" "With more water," Russell said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. He settled his hat back on his head and picked up the reins. "Mr. Wade, please, I cannot let you do that. You must have your own work to attend to." "I do," Russell agreed. "But dawn is my own time. See you tomorrow, Miss Parker." He clicked to the horses and drove away, leaving Adelaide standing in the dust yard with her mouth slightly open and her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Pete walked over to stand beside her, watching the wagon disappear down the road. "Well," Pete said finally, "that is something." "That is insane," Adelaide said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why would he do that?" Pete gave her a sidelong look. "Maybe because he is a good man who sees someone in need, or maybe he has other reasons." "Either way, Miss Adelaide, we need that water, and pride is a cold comfort when the cattle are dying of thirst." Adelaide knew he was right, but the feeling of being beholden to someone, especially a man she barely knew, sat uneasily on her. Still, when she poured out the water for the cattle and watched them drink deeply for the first time in days, she could not help but feel a wash of relief so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. True to his word, Russell appeared the next morning just as dawn was breaking, the wagon loaded with 4 more barrels of water. This time Adelaide was waiting for him, having risen even earlier than usual. "Mr. Wade," she said as he pulled up, "please, I need to understand." "What do you want from me?" Russell looked at her steadily as he climbed down. "Nothing, madam. I want nothing from you." Then why are you doing this? He was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the wagon side. My mother raised me and my sister alone after my father died, he said finally. It was hard. People helped when they could. I learned that sometimes help is just help, nothing more. Your well is dry. I have access to water and a strong back. It seems simple to me. Adelaide felt something in her chest loosen slightly. How long do you intend to keep this up? Russell shrugged. Until your well comes back or you find another solution, however long that takes. The well might not come back at all. Then we will figure something else out, Russell said. And there was something in the way he said we that made Adelaide's skin prickle with awareness. She helped him unload the barrels this time, struggling with the weight until Russell gently but firmly took over. No need to hurt yourself, he said. I have got it. They worked in silence, and when the barrels were situated, Russell prepared to leave again. Will you at least stay for breakfast? Adelaide asked, the words coming out before she had really thought about them. It is not much, but it is the least I can do. Russell hesitated, and for the first time she saw something like uncertainty cross his face. I do not want to impose. You are hauling water 8 miles each way before the sun is barely up, Adelaide said. Breakfast is not an imposition, it is basic human decency. A small smile tugged at the corner of Russell's mouth, the first real expression she had seen from him. Well, when you put it that way. They walked to the house together, and Adelaide felt acutely aware of his presence beside her. The way he moved with an easy grace, the smell of clean sweat and horse, and something else she could not quite identify. In the kitchen, she busied herself with making biscuits and gravy, frying eggs, putting coffee on to boil. Russell sat at the table and watched her work, not saying much but somehow making the silence comfortable rather than awkward. How long have you worked for the Double R? Adelaide asked as she set a plate in front of him. About 5 years, Russell said. Came down from Kansas after my mother passed. My sister married and did not need me hanging around, so I drifted south, found work here and stayed. Do you like it? Russell considered the question as he ate. It is good work. The foreman is fair, the pay is decent. I have been saving, thinking maybe one day I would have my own place, but land with good water is expensive. It is, Adelaide agreed, sitting down across from him with her own plate. Thomas and I saved for 3 years before we could afford this place, and now without the well, it might all be for nothing. You thought about drilling another well, of course, but that costs money I do not have. I looked into it last week. The well driller wants $75 just to start, and there is no guarantee he will hit water. I have maybe $20 to my name after I pay Pete and Jim their wages this month. Russell nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Adelaide found herself stealing glances at him, noticing things she had not before. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the scar on his left hand, white against his tanned skin. The careful, economical way he moved as if he never wasted energy on unnecessary motion. This is real good, Russell said, gesturing to his plate. Thank you. Thank you, Adelaide replied. For the water, for all of it. I know I seemed ungrateful before, but I am not. I am just not used to accepting help. I understand that, Russell said, but everyone needs help sometimes. No shame in it. After he left, Adelaide found herself thinking about him as she went through her daily chores. There was something steady about him, something solid and dependable that she had not encountered in many men. Thomas had been dependable too in his way, but he had also been impulsive and dreamy, always chasing the next opportunity. Russell seemed different, more grounded, as if he knew exactly who he was and did not need to prove anything to anyone. The next morning he came again, and the morning after that. By the end of the first week, a routine had established itself. Russell would arrive just after dawn with the water. They would unload it together despite his protests, and then Adelaide would insist he stay for breakfast. The meals gradually stretched longer as they began to talk more, sharing small details about their lives. Adelaide learned that Russell had learned to break horses from a Mexican vaquero when he was 15, that he could play the harmonica but was not very good at it, that his favorite food was apple pie though he rarely got to eat it. Russell learned that Adelaide had been a school teacher before she married, that she missed reading books more than almost anything, that she had always wanted to see the ocean though she probably never would. Pete and Jim watched this development with interest, though they were careful not to say anything in front of Adelaide. They had both worried about her over the long winter, watching her grieve and struggle and refuse to ask for help from anyone. Seeing her laugh at something Russell said over breakfast, seeing color come back into her face, made them exchange satisfied glances. By the end of the second week, the whole arrangement had begun to feel almost normal. Russell's arrivals were as regular as sunrise, and Adelaide found herself waking earlier than necessary just to make sure she was ready when he appeared. She started putting more effort into the breakfasts, making things she knew he liked, even using some of her precious stores to make a dried apple pie one morning that made Russell's eyes light up with genuine pleasure. "You did not have to do this," he said, looking at the pie as if it were made of gold. "I wanted to," Adelaide said, and realized it was true. She wanted to do things for him, wanted to see that rare smile, wanted to hear his quiet voice telling her stories about the ranch and the horses he worked with. It was dangerous territory, and she knew it. She had loved Thomas, had mourned him deeply, and part of her felt guilty for the feelings that were starting to grow inside her when she looked at Russell Wade. But another part of her, the part that had learned over the past year that life was short and unpredictable, thought that maybe grief did not mean she had to stop living, that maybe it was all right to feel something again besides sadness and determination. Russell must have felt something too, because his visits started to stretch longer. He began arriving a few minutes earlier, staying a few minutes later. He started helping with small tasks around the ranch, fixing a fence post here, rehinging a barn door there, always casual about it, as if he just happened to notice something that needed doing and had a spare moment. Adelaide protested at first, but eventually she gave up and just accepted that this was who he was, a man who helped because it was in his nature to help. The third week brought a complication neither of them had anticipated. Russell arrived one morning looking tired, with a dark bruise spreading across his left cheekbone. "What happened?" Adelaide asked immediately, stepping off the porch to meet him. "Nothing much," Russell said, touching the bruise gingerly. "Had a disagreement with a horse yesterday. He won." "That looks painful. Come inside and let me look at it." In the kitchen, Adelaide made him sit while she examined the bruise. Standing this close to him, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the darker flecks in his blue-gray eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed a cool cloth against the bruise, and she saw his jaw tighten. "Sorry," she murmured. "I know it hurts." "It is all right," Russell said, his voice rougher than usual. His eyes were fixed on her face, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment they stayed like that, frozen in place, the air between them thick with things unsaid. Then Adelaide stepped back quickly, busying herself with refreshing the cloth, her heart hammering. "I will make you some willow bark tea," she said, her voice not quite steady. "It will help with the pain." Russell nodded but did not say anything. The easy comfort they had built over the past weeks felt suddenly fragile, as if acknowledging what was growing between them might shatter it completely. That night, Adelaide lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom she had shared with Thomas. His photograph sat on the dresser, and she could see his face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. He had been a good man, and she had loved him. But he was gone, and she was still here, still living, and the truth was that her heart was starting to wake up from the long sleep of grief. Russell Wade had done that, with his quiet kindness and his steady presence, and the way he looked at her sometimes as if she were something precious. The question was what to do about it. The fourth week brought a heat wave that made the previous weeks seem almost cool by comparison. The temperature climbed past 100 degrees day after day, and everything wilted under the relentless sun. Russell's trips became even more crucial as the cattle drank more to cope with the heat. Adelaide noticed that he was looking tired, the lines around his eyes deeper, his movements a little slower. "You are wearing yourself out," she said one morning as he heaved the last barrel down from the wagon. "Maybe you should skip a day, let yourself rest." "Cannot do that," Russell said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The cattle need the water. Then at least let me help you more." "I can come into town with you, help you fill the barrels." Russell shook his head. "That is 16 miles of hard travel in this heat. No need for both of us to do it. But there is need for you to do it alone." "I am used to it," Russell said simply. Adelaide felt frustration rise in her chest. "Why are you so stubborn about this? Why will you not let me help you when you have been helping me for weeks?" Russell looked at her for a long moment. "Because I choose to help you," he said quietly. "That is different." "How is it different?" "Because I want to. Because when I am here, I am exactly where I want to be." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Adelaide felt her face flush, and it was not from the heat. "Russell," she started, then stopped, not knowing what to say. He stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Adelaide, I know this is complicated. I know you are still grieving your husband, and I know I am just a cowboy with nothing much to offer. But I need you to know that I am not doing this because I feel sorry for you or because I expect anything in return. I am doing this because from the first time I saw you in town, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. And if all I ever get is these mornings and these breakfasts, that will be enough. But I needed you to know." Adelaide's heart was beating so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I think about you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I probably should, more than I know what to do with." Russell reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted to, and cupped her face gently in his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "What do you want to do about it?" "I do not know," Adelaide said honestly. "I am scared, of feeling too much, of losing someone again, of what people will say." "That is a lot of fear," Russell said softly, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I know. But I am also scared of not taking a chance, of letting you slip away because I was too afraid to reach for something good." "Then do not let me slip away," Russell said, and he leaned in and kissed her, gentle and careful and full of so much tenderness that Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. It was different from kissing Thomas, but not wrong. It was its own thing, new and precious and terrifying in the best possible way. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Russell rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I have wanted to do that for so long," he murmured. "How long?" "Since the first time I saw you loading supplies into your wagon in town. You were arguing with the store clerk about a bill, and you were so fierce and so beautiful, and I knew right then that I was in trouble." Adelaide laughed a little shakily. "That was months ago. I know, I am not a fast mover. Apparently you are very patient. Russell smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. When something is worth waiting for, I can be patient forever. They stood there for a while longer, just holding each other, and Adelaide felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hope. The next morning, Russell arrived as usual with the water, but this time when he climbed down from the wagon, Adelaide walked straight to him and kissed him in the dawn light, not caring who might see. Russell dropped the reins and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her right off her feet, and she laughed against his mouth. "Good morning," she said when he set her down. "It certainly is," Russell agreed, his eyes warm. They fell into a new rhythm after that. Russell still came every morning with water, but now there were kisses mixed in with the work, stolen moments of tenderness between hauling barrels and feeding animals. They talked more openly about the future, about what they wanted, about the complications they would have to navigate. Adelaide worried about what people would say, about whether it was too soon after Thomas's death, but Russell was philosophical about it. "People will always find something to talk about," he said. "The question is whether you care more about their opinions than about being happy." Pete and Jim, when they figured out what was happening, were both supportive in their quiet way. Pete pulled Adelaide aside one afternoon and said simply, "Thomas would have wanted you to be happy, Miss Adelaide. And that Wade fellow is a good man. Anyone can see that." The 5th week brought a new challenge. Russell showed up one morning looking grim, and Adelaide knew immediately something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. "Boss is starting to ask questions about why I am going through so many trips to town," Russell said. "I told him I was getting supplies, but he is not stupid. Eventually he is going to figure it out, and he might not be happy about me using ranch time and equipment for personal business." Adelaide felt her stomach sink. "So what do we do?" "I have been thinking about that," Russell said. "I have some money saved. Not a lot, but enough. What if I bought my own wagon and team? Then I could do this on my own time, no questions asked." "Russell, no, you have been saving that money for your own land. I cannot let you spend it on me." "It is my money to spend," Russell said stubbornly. "And what good is saving for land if I am too tired from hauling water on borrowed equipment to enjoy it? Besides, I would be buying the wagon for myself. What I choose to do with it after that is my business." Adelaide wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his face. Russell had made up his mind, and she was learning that when he did that, there was no talking him out of it. "You are the most stubborn man I have ever met," she said. "I have heard that before," Russell said, and kissed her until she forgot what they were arguing about. He bought the wagon and team the following day, a solid used rig that had seen better days but was still serviceable. The cost took a substantial chunk of his savings, but he refused to let Adelaide feel guilty about it. "Now I can come and go as I please," he said. "And when your well is fixed, or we figure out a permanent solution, I will still have the wagon. It is an investment." The 6th week arrived with no change in the situation. The well remained dry, the heat continued unabated, and Russell continued his daily trips with the water. But something had shifted between him and Adelaide. The tenderness had deepened into something stronger, something that felt unshakable. They were falling in love, truly and completely, and both of them knew it even if they had not said the words out loud yet. Adelaide found herself marveling at the strange way life worked. 6 weeks ago, she had been facing disaster, watching everything she had worked for slip away. Now, she was still facing many of the same practical problems, but she had Russell, and somehow that made everything different. She was not alone anymore. She had someone who stood with her, who shared the burden, who made her laugh even when things seemed impossible. One morning near the end of the 6th week, they were sitting on the porch after breakfast, watching the sun climb higher, and Russell said quietly, "I love you, Adelaide. I need you to know that." Adelaide turned to look at him, this man who had shown up out of nowhere and changed everything. "I love you too," she said. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, but I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Russell took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "What scares you? That something will happen to you, that I will lose you like I lost Thomas. That this happiness is not real or will not last." "I cannot promise that nothing will ever happen," Russell said honestly. "Life is uncertain, and we both know that. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to stay by your side for as long as you will have me. And I can promise that what I feel for you is as real as anything I have ever known." "Then that will have to be enough," Adelaide said, and kissed him. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Adelaide was working in the barn when she heard horses approaching, and emerged to find a well-dressed man in a buggy pulling up to the house. He was in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes, and she recognized him immediately as Samuel Thornton, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the county. "Miss Parker," he said, tipping his hat as he climbed down. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Thornton." "What can I do for you?" Thornton looked around the property with an appraising eye. "I have heard you have been having water trouble." Adelaide felt defensive immediately but tried to keep her voice level. "My well went dry, but I am managing." "I am sure you are," Thornton said smoothly. "But I am also sure it cannot be easy. Which is why I wanted to make you an offer. I am looking to expand my holdings, and your property borders mine on the eastern edge. I would be willing to pay you a fair price for the land, more than fair considering the water situation. You could move into town, not have to worry about all this." Adelaide felt anger flare in her chest. "This is my home, Mr. Thornton. My husband and I built it together. I am not interested in selling." "I understand sentiment, Miss Parker, truly I do, but be practical. You cannot run a ranch without water. I am offering you a way out before things get even worse." "Things are not going to get worse," Adelaide said, her voice hard. "And even if they did, I would find a way to manage. I appreciate you coming out here, but my answer is no." Thornton's expression tightened slightly. "I hope you will not come to regret that decision. Running a ranch alone is hard for anyone, but for a woman it is nearly impossible. There is no shame in admitting when you are beaten." "I am not beaten," Adelaide said. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She watched him drive away, her hands clenched into fists, rage and fear mixing in her chest. The truth was that Thornton was right about some things. Running the ranch without reliable water was close to impossible. But she would be damned if she would give up without fighting every step of the way. That evening, she told Russell about the visit. They were sitting by the creek that ran through her property, in a spot where a little water still trickled over the rocks, watching the sun set. "Do you think he will come back?" she asked. "Probably," Russell said. "Men like Thornton usually do not take no for an answer the first time, but you do not have to sell if you do not want to." "I do not want to, but I also do not know how much longer I can keep this up." "Russell, you have been hauling water for 6 weeks now. That cannot continue forever." "Why not?" "Because it is not sustainable, because you are exhausting yourself, because it is not your problem to solve." Russell was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "What if there was another option?" he said finally. "What do you mean?" "What if we got married?" Adelaide sat up, staring at him. "What?" Russell looked nervous but determined. "Hear me out. If we got married, this would be my ranch too. I could quit working for the Double R, put all my time into building this place up. We could pool our resources, hire someone to drill another well or figure out another water source." Together we would have a better chance of making it work than either of us would alone. Russell, you cannot propose marriage as a practical solution to a water problem. I am not, Russell said. Or I am, but not just that. Adelaide, I was going to ask you to marry me anyway, eventually. I know it has only been 6 weeks since we started this, but I have known for a lot longer than that you were the person I wanted to spend my life with. The water situation just makes it make more sense to do it sooner rather than later. Adelaide's mind was reeling. This is crazy. Maybe. Or maybe it is the sanest thing either of us could do. I love you. You love me. We want to be together. Why wait? Because people will talk. Because it has been less than a year since Thomas died. Because everything is happening so fast. Do you want to marry me? Russell asked simply. Forget about all the rest for a moment. If none of those other things mattered, would you want to be my wife? Adelaide looked at him, at this good man who had shown up in her darkest hour and brought not just water but hope and love and a future she had not thought possible. Yes, she said. Yes, I would. Then marry me, Russell said. Let people talk. Let them say whatever they want. We will know the truth that we found each other when we both needed someone, and we are not going to let anything keep us apart. Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks. You are sure about this? I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Then yes, Adelaide said. Yes, I will marry you. Russell let out a breath that sounded like relief and joy mixed together, and he pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They sat by the creek as the stars came out, making plans and dreaming together, and Adelaide felt for the first time in a very long time that everything was going to be all right. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church in Marfa, with Pete and Jim standing as witnesses. Adelaide wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and Russell wore clean trousers and a white shirt, his hair freshly cut and his face shaved smooth. The minister, Reverend Clayton, had raised his eyebrows when they came to him asking to be married so quickly, but Adelaide had looked him in the eye and said simply, "We love each other, Reverend, and we see no reason to wait." Something in her expression must have convinced him, because he agreed without further argument. There were some stares and whispers from the few townspeople who saw them going into the church, but Adelaide held her head high, and Russell walked beside her with quiet pride, and together they spoke their vows in front of God and whoever else cared to judge them. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Russell kissed her gently, his hand cupping her face, and Adelaide felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. They spent their wedding night in Adelaide's house, which was now their house, and it felt right in a way that made all the rushed decisions and the gossip worthwhile. Russell was tender and patient, taking his time, making sure she knew how much he loved her, and Adelaide gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Russell traced patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "I am the luckiest man alive," he murmured. "I think I might be the lucky one," Adelaide said. "You saved me, Russell, in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Russell corrected. "That is what love does." The next morning, Russell moved his few belongings into the house, and they began their life together in earnest. True to his word, Russell quit his job at the Double R, explaining to his foreman that he had gotten married and was going to work his own place now. The foreman, a gruff man named Harrison, had looked at him with something like respect and said, "Wade, you are one of the best hands I have ever had. If things do not work out, you come see me. I will always have a place for you." With Russell working full-time on the ranch, things began to improve in small ways. He repaired the fences that had been sagging, reorganized the barn for better efficiency, worked with the horses until they were responding better. He still made the daily trips for water, but now it was shared between them, Adelaide often riding into town with him so they could haul twice as much each trip. It was hard work, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. The real breakthrough came at the end of August. Russell had been talking to people in town, asking questions about wells and water tables and geological formations. One conversation led to another, and eventually he met an old-timer named Dutch Kellerman who had been a well driller for 40 years before retiring. "Your well went dry in July," Dutch asked when Russell explained the situation. "And it is about 20 feet deep." "That is right." Dutch nodded slowly. "I know that area. Your well probably hit a shallow aquifer that runs dry during hot summers. But there is deeper water there. I would stake my reputation on it." "You would need to go down at least 50 feet, maybe 60, but you would hit it." "How much would that cost?" Dutch scratched his chin. "Well, I am retired, but I still have all my equipment. Tell you what, I am bored as hell sitting around town doing nothing. You pay for materials and feed me while I work, and I will drill your well for you. Call it a wedding present." Russell could hardly believe it. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I heard about you hauling water every day for that Parker woman before you married her. That is the kind of dedication I respect. Besides, I miss the work. Be nice to get my hands dirty again." Russell shook Dutch's hand so hard he was afraid he might break the old man's fingers. "When can you start?" "How about tomorrow?" Dutch was as good as his word. He showed up the next day with his equipment loaded on a wagon, and he and Russell went to work. Adelaide kept them fed and supplied with water to drink, marveling at the sight of the drill bit chewing into the earth, going deeper and deeper. Dutch was a character, full of stories from his years traveling around Texas drilling wells, and Adelaide found herself enjoying his company almost as much as she appreciated his skills. It took 3 weeks of hard work, but at 62 feet, the drill hit water. Not just a trickle, but a strong, steady flow that made Dutch cackle with satisfaction. "Told you," he shouted. "There is your water, clear and cold and more than enough for everything you need." Adelaide burst into tears of relief, and Russell wrapped his arms around her, laughing and crying himself. They had done it. After nearly 2 months of struggle and worry, they had found a solution. Dutch helped them install a proper pump, and by the first week of September, the new well was fully operational. The water flowed clear and sweet, filling the troughs, reviving the garden, washing away the dust and fear that had accumulated over the summer. Adelaide stood by the well that first evening after Dutch had gone home, just watching the water pour out, and she felt Russell come up behind her and wrap his arms around her waist. "We made it," she said softly. "We did," Russell agreed, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Together." The rest of September passed in a blur of activity. With reliable water again, they could focus on building the ranch up properly. They bought more cattle, taking advantage of low prices from ranchers who were struggling with the drought. Russell's knowledge of horses allowed them to start a small breeding program, raising quality stock that they could sell for good money. Adelaide's garden flourished, providing vegetables they could eat and sell in town. Pete and Jim, who had both been prepared to move on if the ranch failed, stayed on and worked harder than ever, pleased to see their loyalty rewarded. Samuel Thornton came by one more time in October, apparently having heard that the water situation was resolved. He offered to buy the ranch again, this time at a lower price, suggesting that they should take the money while they could because running a ranch was too hard for newlyweds who did not know what they were doing. Adelaide had smiled sweetly and told him they were doing just fine, thank you, and that he should not bother coming back. Russell had stood behind her the whole time, his arms crossed, his expression making it very clear that Thornton was not welcome. The older man had left looking disgruntled, and they had not seen him since. As autumn settled over West Texas, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Adelaide and Russell fell into the rhythm of married life. They worked hard during the day, side by side in whatever needed doing, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and talk about their plans, their dreams, the future they were building together. Russell taught Adelaide about horses, how to read their moods and movements, and she taught him about keeping accounts and managing the household finances. They complemented each other perfectly, each bringing strengths that balanced the other's weaknesses. In November, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a couple of weeks but had not been sure until the morning sickness started. She told Russell over breakfast one morning, just saying it straight out because she did not know any other way to do it. "I am going to have a baby." Russell's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, his eyes wide. "You are sure?" "I am sure." A grin spread slowly across his face, growing wider and wider until he looked like he might split in half from happiness. He stood up so fast he knocked his chair over, came around the table and picked Adelaide up and spun her around, laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he shouted. "Adelaide, we are going to be parents." "Careful," Adelaide said, laughing herself. "You will make me dizzy." Russell set her down carefully, immediately looking concerned. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working so hard?" "Russell, I am pregnant, not made of glass. I am fine." But Russell fussed over her anyway, and Adelaide found she did not mind nearly as much as she thought she would. It was nice to be cared for, nice to see the joy and excitement in his face every time he looked at her, and remembered that she was carrying their child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Adelaide continued working on the ranch as much as she was able, though Russell and the hands insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. She spent more time in the house, sewing baby clothes and fixing up the small room next to their bedroom as a nursery. Russell built a cradle with his own hands, working on it in the evenings by lamplight, sanding every surface until it was smooth as silk. In March of 1883, on a cool evening with rain pattering on the roof, Adelaide went into labor. Russell rode into town at a gallop to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing and worrying while Adelaide labored in the bedroom. Pete and Jim stayed in the bunkhouse, giving the couple privacy but remaining close in case they were needed. Just after dawn, as the sun was breaking through the clouds and painting the world gold, Adelaide gave birth to a son. Russell was allowed into the room a few minutes later, and he stood by the bed looking down at his wife and newborn child with an expression of such wonder and love that Mrs. Henderson smiled to herself as she packed up her supplies. "He is perfect," Russell said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand with one careful finger. "Adelaide, he is absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Adelaide said, exhausted but happy. "Same nose, same chin." "Poor kid," Russell said, but he was grinning. They named him Thomas Russell Wade, Thomas after Adelaide's first husband, Russell after his father. It felt right to honor the past while embracing the future, to acknowledge that Adelaide's love for Thomas had been real even as her love for Russell was equally real and true. Russell never felt any jealousy or competition with his son's namesake. He had known from the beginning that Adelaide had been married before, had loved before, and he respected that. Love was not a finite resource to be guarded jealously. It expanded to include everyone who deserved it. Little Thomas, or Tommy as they quickly started calling him, was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite that amazed everyone. He grew quickly through that first spring and summer, and Adelaide and Russell marveled at every new development, every smile and coo and attempt to grasp objects. Being parents suited them both. Adelaide was patient and nurturing, while Russell was playful and gentle, always ready to walk the floor with Tommy when he was fussy or sing him nonsense songs in his deep voice. The ranch continued to prosper. The combination of good water, hard work, and smart management paid off in steady profits. By the summer of 1883, they had paid off the debt they had incurred drilling the new well and were starting to build up savings again. They hired another hand, a young man named Carlos Mendez who had a gift with cattle, and the operation ran more smoothly than ever. Life was good, better than Adelaide had dared to hope during those dark days when the well first went dry. She often thought about how much had changed in just over a year, how a disaster had led to the greatest blessing of her life. If the well had not gone dry, Russell would not have shown up with his wagon full of water. They might never have gotten to know each other, might never have fallen in love. Sometimes the worst things led to the best things, and you just had to trust that there was a pattern to it all even when you could not see it. In September of 1883, exactly 1 year after the new well had been drilled, they threw a party to celebrate. Dutch Kellerman was the guest of honor, along with Pete and Jim and Carlos, and everyone else who had helped them through the difficult times. They roasted a pig and made gallons of lemonade, and people came from miles around to eat and drink and dance to the music provided by a couple of ranch hands who played fiddle and guitar. Adelaide danced with Russell under the stars, Tommy sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby, and she felt such a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had been given that she could barely speak. "Happy?" Russell asked, his arms around her waist as they swayed to the music. "So happy I do not have words for it," Adelaide said. "Thank you, Russell, for everything, for the water, for the love, for all of it." "Thank you for saying yes," Russell replied, "for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who showed up at your door with nothing but good intentions and a wagon." "Best decision I ever made," Adelaide said, and kissed him. The years that followed were full and rich. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Grace in 1885 and another son named James in 1887. The ranch grew from a struggling operation to one of the most successful small ranches in the county. They added more land as they could afford it, always making sure they had good water sources before they bought. Russell's reputation as a horseman spread, and people came from all over to buy horses he had trained. Adelaide started teaching school again, holding classes in their home for the children of nearby ranchers who had no other access to education. They had their share of troubles, of course. There was a bad winter in 1886 that killed some of their cattle, and a drought in 1889 that made them grateful for their deep well. Grace came down with scarlet fever in 1888 and nearly died, spending 2 terrible weeks hovering between life and death, while Adelaide and Russell took turns sitting by her bedside. But she recovered, and they all emerged from the experience grateful for every day they had together. Tommy grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and the animals. By the time he was 7, he was already helping Russell with the horses, showing the same natural talent his father had. Grace was a spitfire, fearless and independent, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. James was quiet and thoughtful, more like Adelaide, content to sit for hours with a book or watching the clouds drift by. Adelaide sometimes thought about Thomas, her first husband, and she no longer felt guilty when she did. He had been a good man and she had loved him, but he was part of her past now. Russell was her present and her future, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had been blessed twice in her life with good men who loved her. Not everyone got that. Some people did not even get it once. One evening in the summer of 1893, when Tommy was 10 and Grace was 8 and James was 6, the whole family sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the ranch. Russell had his arm around Adelaide, and the children were arguing good-naturedly about something Adelaide was not quite paying attention to. The air smelled like sage and dust and growing things, and the world felt peaceful in a way that made Adelaide's heart swell. "Do you remember the first time you came here with water?" Adelaide asked Russell quietly. "Of course," Russell said. "How could I forget? I was so nervous I nearly turned the wagon around 3 times on the way here. You never told me that. I did not want you to know what a coward I was. Here I was, trying to be all noble and helpful, and I could barely work up the courage to talk to you." Adelaide laughed. "And now look at us. 4 children, a successful ranch, more happiness than I knew what to do with." 5 children, Russell corrected. Adelaide turned to look at him, startled. "What?" Russell gestured to her stomach with a small smile. "Unless I am very much mistaken, you have been tired lately, and I noticed you did not eat much at supper. Am I wrong?" Adelaide thought about it, counting days in her head, and realized he was right. "I think you might be right," she said slowly. "How did you know before I did?" "I pay attention," Russell said simply, and kissed her temple. "So 5 children. Are you all right with that? Are you?" "Adelaide, I would be all right with 10 children as long as they were yours." "Let us not get carried away," Adelaide said dryly, but she was smiling. Tommy, who had been listening with the keen ears of a child, said, "Are we getting another baby?" "It looks like it," Adelaide confirmed. "Can it be another girl?" Grace demanded. "I am tired of being outnumbered by boys." "We will take whatever we get and be grateful," Russell said firmly, but he was grinning. The baby, another boy they named Daniel, was born in February of 1894. He was the easiest of all Adelaide's pregnancies and births, as if her body had finally figured out exactly what to do. Daniel was a sunny, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to observe the world around him with wide, curious eyes. By the mid-1890s, the Parker Wade Ranch, as it was known locally, was firmly established as one of the best-run operations in the region. They employed 5 full-time hands and several part-time workers, ran over 200 head of cattle, and had a horse breeding program that was attracting attention from as far away as San Antonio and El Paso. Adelaide's school had expanded to include nearly 20 students from surrounding ranches, and she had to hire an assistant teacher to help manage the load through it all. The love between Adelaide and Russell remained the foundation of everything they built. They still made time for each other, despite the demands of the ranch and the children. Still sat together on the porch in the evenings. Still looked at each other with the same warmth and affection that had grown during those 6 weeks when Russell hauled water every dawn without a word of complaint. In 1898, on a hot July day very much like the day Adelaide's well had first gone dry 16 years earlier, they stood together by the well that Russell had insisted Dutch drill all those years ago. The children were off doing their various chores, the ranch was humming with activity, and Adelaide leaned against Russell's shoulder with a sigh of contentment. "You ever think about how different our lives would be if the well had not gone dry?" she asked. "Sometimes," Russell admitted. "But mostly I just think about how grateful I am that it did. I know that sounds strange, being grateful for something that caused you so much stress and worry. But without it, I would never have had an excuse to come here. I might have spent the rest of my life just seeing you occasionally in town and never working up the courage to speak to you." "I think you would have found a way eventually," Adelaide said. You are persistent when you want something. Maybe. Or maybe we would have missed each other entirely, and you would have ended up with someone else, and I would have lived my whole life not knowing what I was missing. But that did not happen, Adelaide said firmly. We found each other, and we built this life together, and every single day I am grateful for that. Even the hard days, even the days when the work is exhausting and the children are driving me crazy, and I am so tired I can barely stand. Because at the end of those days, I still have you, and that makes everything worthwhile. Russell turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. His hair was starting to show threads of silver now, and there were permanent lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Adelaide, he was as handsome as the day he had first driven up with a wagon full of water and a quiet offer of help. "I love you," Russell said simply. "More now than I did 16 years ago, which I would not have thought possible back then. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. I would haul water for you every day for the rest of my life if that was what you needed, and I would count myself lucky to do it." "I love you too," Adelaide said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for being patient while I figured out it was all right to love again, for building this beautiful life with me." They stood there by the well for a long time, holding each other, and Adelaide thought about all the years that had passed and all the years still to come. The children would grow up and have lives of their own. Tommy was already talking about wanting his own ranch someday. Grace had declared she was going to be a doctor, scandalous as that was for a girl to even consider. James wanted to be a writer, and Daniel was still too young to know what he wanted, except that he loved horses as much as his father did. Whatever the future brought, Adelaide knew she would face it with Russell by her side, just as they had faced every challenge and celebrated every joy together since that July morning when her well went dry, and a quiet cowboy had shown up at dawn with water and had kept showing up, day after day, week after week, until his presence had become as essential to her as water itself. The years continued to flow past like the water from their well, steady and sure. Tommy took over more and more of the ranch operations as he grew into young manhood, eventually marrying a girl from town named Sarah and building a house on the northern edge of the property. Grace shocked everyone by actually pursuing her dream of becoming a doctor, going east to medical school, and then returning to Marfa to open a practice that served the whole county. James went to college and became a teacher, eventually taking over Adelaide's school when she decided to retire. Daniel, true to his early love of horses, became a renowned horse trainer who traveled all over Texas and even to other states, always returning home between jobs. Adelaide and Russell grew old together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down but their love remaining as strong as ever. They handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Tommy and his growing family, but remained active and involved, offering advice when asked and babysitting grandchildren with enthusiasm. In the summer of 1920, on the 38th anniversary of the day Russell had first shown up with water, they held a big celebration on the ranch. All 4 of their children were there with their spouses and children, a total of 13 grandchildren ranging in age from infants to teenagers. Pete had passed away years before, but Jim was still alive, ancient and cantankerous but still sharp as a tack. Dutch Kellerman had died in 1905, but his legacy lived on in the well that still provided abundant water for the ranch. Russell made a speech at the celebration, standing on the porch with Adelaide beside him, their children and grandchildren gathered on the lawn below. His voice was not as strong as it once was, but it still carried clearly in the evening air. 38 years ago, I drove up to this house with 4 barrels of water and no real plan beyond helping someone who needed help," he said. "I did not know then that I was meeting the woman I would spend the rest of my life loving. I did not know that we would build this ranch together, raise 4 amazing children, and be blessed with more grandchildren than I can keep track of sometimes." This got a laugh from the crowd. All I knew was that Adelaide Parker needed water and I could provide it. Sometimes life is that simple. You see someone who needs something you can give and you give it, and you do not worry about what you will get in return. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, what you get in return is more than you ever dreamed possible. He turned to Adelaide, taking her hand. "Thank you for letting me haul water for you all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who fell in love with you at first sight, but was too tongue-tied to say it for weeks. Thank you for building this life with me. You are, and always have been, the best thing that ever happened to me." Adelaide was crying openly now, and several of the grandchildren were sniffling too. "Thank you for showing up," she said simply. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for every day of these 38 years. I love you, Russell Wade. I have loved you since the day you first drove up with that water, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They kissed to applause and cheers from their family, and then the party continued late into the night, full of music and laughter and love. Adelaide and Russell had several more good years together after that celebration. They watched more grandchildren being born, saw Tommy's ranch operation expand and prosper, attended Grace's wedding when she finally married at age 42, celebrated James's first published book, and cheered at Daniel's horse shows. They took walks together every evening that weather permitted, Russell's pace slower now but his hand still firm in Adelaide's. They still slept curled together every night, still told each other they loved each other every morning and evening, still looked at each other with eyes that saw past the wrinkles and gray hair to the young people they had been when they fell in love. Russell passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925 at the age of 70. Adelaide woke one morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was enormous, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, but she held on because that was what Russell would have wanted. Their children surrounded her with love and support, and she leaned on them in a way she had never been able to before, finally understanding that needing help was not weakness but human. She lived for 3 more years after Russell died, years that were quieter but still full of love from her family. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch. She taught several of the granddaughters to sew and garden. She read voraciously, making her way through every book she could get her hands on. She wrote letters to Grace and James and Daniel when they were traveling, long letters full of news and advice and love. On a summer morning in 1928, Adelaide Parker Wade died in her sleep at the age of 70, in the same bed where she had slept with both Thomas and Russell, in the house that had seen so much life and love and struggle and triumph. Her children buried her next to Russell in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that provided shade on hot days. The ranch continued for generations after that, passed down through Tommy's line, and then his children's children. The well that Dutch had drilled in 1882 kept flowing, providing water for the family and the land for over a century before modern improvements replaced it with something more efficient. But the old well was never filled in or destroyed. It stood as a reminder of the summer when Adelaide's well went dry, when a cowboy named Russell Wade showed up at dawn with water and kept coming back day after day without being asked, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love story that sustained generations. The great-great-grandchildren of Adelaide and Russell, people who never met them but heard their stories told and retold at family gatherings, would sometimes stand by that old well and think about how different all their lives would have been if one well had not gone dry in July, if one cowboy had not decided to help, if two people had not been brave enough to reach for love when it was offered. They understood, in ways that perhaps Adelaide and Russell themselves had not been able to articulate, that the best things in life often come from the hardest moments, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is showing up when they need you most and staying even when it would be easier to leave. The story of Adelaide and Russell became a family legend, passed down through the generations, embellished in some retellings and simplified in others, but always maintaining its essential truth at the core that on the hottest day of July in 1882, a well went dry and a cowboy started hauling water, and from that simple beginning, everything else followed. The love, the family, the ranch, the whole sprawling network of descendants who carried Adelaide and Russell's blood and legacy into the future. All of it traced back to those 6 weeks, when Russell Wade drove his wagon to the Parker place every dawn and left water without asking for anything in return, except the chance to see Adelaide's face and maybe, eventually, earn her love. It was, everyone agreed, exactly the kind of love story that the West was built on. Practical and romantic all at once, grounded in the harsh realities of survival but elevated by the human capacity for kindness and connection. It was about two people who found each other in difficult circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. It was about persistence and patience and the willingness to do hard things for the people you loved. It was about water and drought and the eternal struggle to make life bloom in an unforgiving landscape. But most of all, it was about love, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds families and legacies and stories worth telling for generations. And if you went to that ranch today, more than 140 years after Adelaide's well went dry, you would still find descendants of Russell and Adelaide working the land, still raising cattle and horses, still fighting the same battles against heat and drought and hardship that their ancestors fought. You would still find that old well, now covered and protected but preserved as a piece of family history. And if you asked anyone there about it, they would smile and tell you the story of how their however many times great-grandparents fell in love over barrels of water during a hot West Texas summer, and how that love sustained them through everything life threw at them, and how it continues to sustain their descendants even now. Because that is what real love does. It does not just exist in the moment. It ripples outward through time, creating waves that touch lives that have not even been born yet. Russell Wade hauled water for 6 weeks without a word, without asking for anything in return, simply because Adelaide needed it and he could provide it. From that simple act of service grew a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that lasted generations. It was not dramatic or showy. There were no grand gestures beyond the daily, quiet commitment to showing up and doing what needed to be done. But it was real, and it was deep, and it was exactly the kind of love that changes everything. On summer evenings, when the heat finally broke and the wind carried the smell of sage across the ranch, you could almost imagine you saw them there, Adelaide and Russell, sitting on the porch of the old house, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, watching the sun set over land they loved and had worked so hard to build into something lasting. You could almost hear Russell's deep voice telling some story about the horses, Adelaide's laugh in response, the comfortable silence between them that came from decades of knowing each other completely. You could almost feel the love that had soaked into the very soil of that place, making it sacred in a way that had nothing to do with churches and everything to do with the human heart's capacity to love and be loved in return. The well went dry in July. The cowboy hauled water every dawn for 6 weeks without a word. And from that beginning, from that simple foundation of need and service and growing affection, came everything else. The marriage, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the ranch, the legacy, the story that would be told and retold until no one remembered quite where the truth ended and the legend began. But the heart of it remained true always. Love does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up quietly at dawn with a wagon full of water and just keeps showing up, day after day, until it becomes the most important thing in your life, the thing around which everything else revolves, the thing that makes all the struggle and hardship worthwhile. That was the story of Adelaide Parker and Russell Wade. That was the legacy they left behind. And on hot summer days in Marfa, Texas, when the sun beat down mercilessly and the wind blew dust across the land when water was precious and every drop counted, people still remembered the summer of 1882, and they understood that some things never changed. The land was hard, life was harder, but love, when you were lucky enough to find it, made everything possible.